Good afternoon. My name is Rachel, and today I'll be presenting on the intersections of Maya identity and higher education in the Yucatan state of Mexico. My presentation is titled Internal Colonial Geographies and Institutional Invisibility. Thank you for joining me today. This project uses digital and in-person fieldwork methods at the Universidad de Oriente in Valladolid, in the state of Yucatan in Mexico. Yucatan is one of 3 Mexican states in the Yucatan Peninsula, and the 2015 National Intercentral Data reports about 65% of the state identify as Maya. Together with neighboring countries, Yucatan is part of the Mundo Maya, or Maya world, made famous by archaeological heritage sites such as Chichen Itza. Yucatan has 3 urban areas, and the capital, Mérida, was the seat of power in the region under Spanish colonialism. This presentation is the initial stages of my doctoral dissertation, a mixed methods and interdisciplinary project that seeks to answer a complex question. What, if any, impact does identity formation processes have on Maya students' ability to complete their studies? To unpack this question, I've broken it down into smaller questions, each one answered by a specific method and disciplinary approach. For instance, an international and comparative education approach answers what is unique about UNO, while geospatial methods address geographic impacts. The bottom 2 questions will be answered using intersectional analysis drawn from these mixed methods and interdisciplinary frameworks. This presentation focuses on preliminary findings resulting from geospatial data analysis using Esri's ArcMap program to integrate geographic analysis with national census data and a university directory. It also draws on pilot interviews conducted in Orlando, Florida, and Yucatan, short periods of participant observation, statistical data compiled by national and international agencies, digitally available documents, social media, and news items. Next, I will touch on 8 findings arising from my preliminary fieldwork. I have discussed my GIS process and findings in detail in a previous presentation, but for context, I'll quickly review them here. I found that despite a higher than average spending on education, Mexico has lower spending per student than most OECD members. Additionally, enrollment rates for post-secondary education have improved, but remain substantially lower than other OECD countries, and have somewhat stagnated in recent years. Although the Mexican government funds 71% of post-secondary education, higher than the OECD average at 67%, graduation rates are substantially lower, as you can see here in this figure on the top. Statistics for Yucatan State show dropout rates for students enrolled in undergraduate degrees increasing between 2010 and 2017. Despite efforts to decrease this attrition between 2010 and 2011, attrition is rising. Generally, Yucatan's college students were struggling even before the pandemic. Here I used a directory of public tertiary educational institutions in Yucatan State to locate them geographically. Notice that with few exceptions, most are in the 3 urban areas that are the darkest shades, indicating high population concentrations in those municipalities. And keep in mind that these urban areas were inhabited by Spanish colonizers. Now, perhaps you're thinking it makes sense to put universities in higher population areas. The problem here is that Maya populations are widely dispersed, while Spanish descent are clustered in the urban areas as a result of colonial-era decisions about settlement. And there are ways around population dispersion. For example, small regional campuses like we see in Wisconsin, and the recent shift towards an integrated college system in Pennsylvania are 2 possible solutions. This GIS analysis shows the relationship between population and proportion of indigenous language speakers. The Mexican census does not have a race or ethnicity category like we do in the US. Instead, they use linguistic ability to document indigeneity. This map shows that municipalities with the highest proportion of indigenous language speakers are also typically decentered from the urban areas, where non-indigenous language speaking Spanish speakers live. A limitation here is that many indigenous persons travel to work in the tourism and construction industries, and census data relies on the location of the permanent residents. This map depicts buffer zones. In other words, a circular range in miles from each of the public universities, selected based on 7.5 miles of travel in urban areas and 15 miles in rural areas. Notice that most of the municipalities with the majority of indigenous language speakers are outside the circles, which indicates that a daily commute to the universities would be infeasible and time-consuming. These maps demonstrate that the logics of settler colonialism have a strong influence on the geography of modern-day universities. The Mexican education system consists of primary, secondary, and preparatoria, what we would consider K through 12, although only primary and secondary are compulsory. Mexican education has also experienced a lot of upheaval, generally every 6 years when a new president makes sweeping policy changes. While some institutions are autonomous and thus outside of political control, powerful teachers' unions and student activism make university campuses locations of political tension. Funding is also a problem, as one of my participants notes. Public schools are not good, so since the government controls everything, what they teach and how the whole installations and everything are really bad. So the people who go there are usually from lower class." End quote. This is also an indication of an interesting pattern of university student migration. Low-income students migrate to urban centers, while upper-class students migrate internationally. The same participant noted that many low-income students attend university on scholarship because the cost is prohibitive, and that the same level of opportunities are not available in rural areas. They do have some like the main universities, and they're good and you get a good education from them. But most of the times you don't, so there's a lot of people from other states coming to the city, and they say, well, I have to come here because my state won't offer it, or the opportunities are not the same. People from the city, we usually say that about other countries. Language is an anthropological indicator of identity, and in Yucatan there is a lot of linguistic crossover. At first glance, it may appear as though Spanish is colonizing Yucatec Maya, as we can see here in the use of the Maya word wish being converted to the verb wishar, and thus enabling Spanish grammatical conjugation. However, it is not that simple. This picture was taken in a cantina in the heart of downtown Mérida, the colonial headquarters from the region. This fusion of Maya and Spanish is seen in daily conversation, where Spanish speakers use Mayan and Mayan speakers use Spanish, or when both use fusions of both, or even other languages, such as apapachar, based on the Nahuatl word for hug. This linguistic fusion mirrors the exchange of other things, behaviors, ideas, religions, historical narratives, and so on, to create a Yucatec culture distinct from other Spanish and Mayan regions. Of course, Yucatec exists on a continuum between Spanish and Maya and includes an unspoken implicit class and ethnic hierarchy, the legacies of their colonial history. This legacy is apparent in the state and federal levels of educational administration. For instance, in an interview with the General Director for Educational and Regional Development for the Secretary of Education for the state of Yucatan, the director confirmed what my initial investigations suggested. Of the data collected on college students, there is no breakdown of ethnicity. She stated that the Mayas are invisible, los Mayas son invisibles, in state-level administration, noting it is a big problem. When we consider that 65% of the state is an indigenous language speaker, that a third of college students in the state drop out, and that universities are difficult to access geographically for rural persons, it is clearly possible, even probable, that Maya students are disproportionately dropping out. But we don't know. And aside from preparatoria, to the director's knowledge, there are no first-year experience type programs, such as those we have here in the U.S. In an interview with an anthropology professor from the Autonomous University in Yucatan, who is of Maya descent, she noted that she no longer feels Maya. Although her father raised cattle and she grew up speaking Maya, as her education progressed, she became increasingly assimilated into Spanish and English language and culture. In other words, academic culture. She noticed that her Maya language skills were fading, and so began to hire assistants who were fluent in Maya so that she could continue speaking her mother language. Interestingly, she was the one who told me that the poor are the ones who can't live their culture, referencing the need for many rural Mayans to focus on survival rather than enjoying the pleasures of their Mayan culture, which speaks to how strongly these social hierarchies and historical narratives of mestizaje are embedded even in the thinking of an anthropology professor. This is when my interest in UNO sparked. The director was proud of the state's accomplishment in constructing UNO por los Mayas, for the Mayas, because it has degree programs that the Mayas prefer, que los Mayas prefieren. UNO was established 15 years ago to serve Mayan students. Its programs center on Mayan language and culture and the tourism industry, and its neoliberal mission statement has the goals of fostering industry partnerships and developing regional economies. On my first visit, one program director echoed the anthropology professor's sentiment, and although speaking Maya is a prerequisite for her program, she also noted the difficulty in maintaining her dual identities, her professional one, the academic one, steeped in Spanish politics, and her personal one, located in a Mayan family and community. I am not here to rain on UNO's parade. Indeed, at UNO, Yucatec Maya are not invisible. Most of the students, faculty, and staff are Yucatec Maya, although the rector is a political appointment by the state governor. The programs and curricula are created by Maya instructors for Maya students and include programs such as Maya language and culture and culinary degrees that teach students modern takes on traditional Mayan foods. UNO's location is at a geographic and ideological crossroads, near the tourism-driven economies of Piste and Chichen Itza, and located in a Maya-majority municipality. UNO is also the intersection of neoliberal economies, politics between the nation-state and ejidos, and students' family-based personal worlds. At UNO, they are learning how to be both Maya and successful entrepreneurs. Thus, UNO is full of potential to understand how students negotiate Maya identities, and how these negotiations might impact the region's economy in the future. However, its location is still firmly rooted in the periphery of the state. This is even seen in the campus itself. The campus is beautifully spread out with lots of grassy spaces and trees, and buildings have stylistic paintings and patterns that invoke a sense of Mayaness. Signs are posted in both Spanish and in Yucatec Maya, such as this one here in the lower right corner with the quote from Dr. Seuss. And yet, the plaque that commemorates UNO's 15th anniversary, while retaining this Mayaness in its design, is only written in Spanish. While UNO seems to be making strides towards serving Maya students, I'm left wondering at the scope of the invisibility in the state administrative levels. It is this combination of historical legacies, institutional invisibilities, and cultural hierarchies that I am calling the internal colonial geography of knowledge, the structures that intersect to make Maya students invisible. In turn, this invisibility, and all its implications, create barriers for college students that are compounded by the multiple identities they must learn to negotiate. Unfortunately, this is where I must leave off because COVID happened. The COVID pandemic arrived mere months before I was scheduled to begin my year-long ethnographic fieldwork at UNO. The differences in policies, timing, and restrictions between the U.S. and Mexico, compounded by new university policies based on Florida state mandates, made it difficult to determine when, or even if, I would be able to return to Mexico. So I set about reworking my IRB proposal to transition to a digital project, but it has been slow going due to my reliance on a few contacts who are also scrambling. My lack of presence on campus has made recruitment difficult even with a newly implemented digital survey that I was finally able to launch this October. It seems clear to me that despite my mixed methods approach, the in-person ethnographic component is critical to answering my question. I've done about all I can do from a distance. COVID permitting, I hope to continue my project this spring before I have to give back my grant funding. Thank you for your attention.